Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. For tonight's show, we're going to welcome back Dave Leidy. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vic. Good to be back.
Oh, it's great having you back. Dave, you were our guest for episode 95. For those who might have missed that episode, please give a synopsis of why you were on that show.
Well, I had the Dogman experience back in 2009, North Carolina, when I was camping with my wife. And it affected me quite a bit and got me interested to where I am now.
For anyone who hasn't heard that story, I definitely recommend you tune in. Again, it's episode 95. It'll leave an impression on you. You were contacted by a couple who had a very unnerving story to share with you. How and why did they reach out to you in the first place?
Well, I believe that this couple were having problems for quite some time, and they decided to do something about it. I don't know how long they didn't do anything about it, but they decided to do something about it, and they found my name through a friend of theirs to come in and talk to them.
I can't think of a better guy to reach out to for the situation they were faced with. What was the process you underwent to go from a wannabe researcher to a full-fledged one?
Well, after my experience on the road in North Carolina, or I should say in the swamp, it really did affect me very deeply, and it spurred a lot of curiosity after I was finished being afraid of it. And I felt that I really needed to see what else could be done about finding out more about these creatures. So within that research, I started to contact people who I knew were known researchers in the subject and reached out to them through various means of email and Facebook and possibly a couple of phone calls. And I got a pretty warm reception from a couple of people, which really helped me to begin the process of becoming an investigator.
This field definitely needs more researchers like yourself. You're a huge addition to it. The last time you came on the show, you expressed an interest to me in becoming a researcher for the NADP. Whatever became of that?
Well, as I said, I was very interested and curious in the subject after my encounter. I reached out to Jody Cook at the North American Dogman Project, and we talked for quite a while, and he gave me a position as an investigator for the project. So now I'm basically covering the Philadelphia area from October to May and Northeast Vermont from June to September. The NADP is really a great organization, and if anyone wants to make a report, they're definitely the ones to contact. They have loads of experience, and I'm very proud and excited to be connected with them. It was really because of my connection with the project that the farmer contacted me, and he felt confident that he would be taken seriously. As the farmer and I have a mutual friend, and that friend is who I told of my connection with the project, and I believe how that all came together was through that.
Dave, I know I'm not the only person who's wondering this. What makes a person want to put themselves into the field researching something as formidable as dogmen?
I think overall it's curiosity. If you can get past the fear factor as much as possible and start to wonder more about what these guys are, where they came from, where they're going to, and that curiosity overrides the fear, then you can put yourself in a position to investigate. And also, there's a lot of people out there that are having a real problem with these guys, and they need somebody to turn to. And if you're willing to do that and help them, then all that much better.
Well, I can't tell you how glad I am knowing that you're in this field researching them. Is researching dogmen everything you hoped it would be? I'm sure like a lot of things, you can think something's going to be a certain way, but once you get into it and actually do it, in a lot of cases it can be totally different. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that is a very rewarding subject in a lot of ways. It's an unknown subject in a lot of ways also, so almost every encounter that you investigate or any lead that you investigate is sometimes completely different from the other one. And you can start to go through them and pick up similarities and differences, and that makes it pretty interesting. I will say that a lot of instances turn out to be explainable, and that's also part of the thing that makes it interesting. I remember a guy told me once that if you see a hoof print, think horse, not zebra. And I've always tried to remember that, because a lot of times it turns out to be completely explainable, and that is sometimes better for the person who has called you in to investigate a problem he might be having. If you can give him a perfectly reasonable explanation, sometimes they feel better about that. And if you can't, well, then you go from there. And all of it's interesting.
I like that saying about hoof prints. I actually used that on one of the shows after episode 95 when I heard you mention that. Before you tell us about the Schwenksville incident, Dave, please tell us about the place where it happened.
Well, that was a pretty interesting place for sure. There's a lot of history in southeastern Pennsylvania back to when the first Europeans came over, and after that, all the way up through the 13 colonies to the War of Independence. All of that history seems to have really passed through the whole area. It's actually kind of hard to go through a town or a province anywhere in that area without showing some kind of historical background to the place. This particular place, I'll say Schwenksville, but it's quite a large area. Schwenksville is the center of maybe a 50 to 100 square mile radius of everything we're going to talk about. So this place has been in this couple's family since 1656, I believe, or maybe I'm wrong about, but 1756. So it is a very old-style town. When you go into the town by any direction, it's not built up like a lot of towns are along the major highways. It's still an old rural route, and the town is very laid back and very colonial feel to it. I think that George Washington may have even come through there, and the Continental troops had camped in the area.
Yeah, sounds like it does have a really rich history. The fact that that property has been in the family for so long, that just blows me away. You don't find that very often.
No, and even if you do, you don't really get a complete feel for the intensity of the historical content. I talked to the man about it, and he gave me a full report, and he was very proud of it. He said that he bought the property from his father for $1 back in 1976, and it was owned by his family. Before that, back to 1756, he said that his family purchased the farm from a man called John Paulings, who bought it from a man named Height, and Height purchased it from a guy named Stevenson, who got it from the family of the Penningtons, who got it from William Penn. So we go all the way back to pre-revolution. He was really proud of that. So basically, like everything on the East Coast, it was, I don't want to say owned, but it was inhabited by Native American tribes in the area. And then William Penn took possession of the area of Pennsylvania. And then through that, this family became ownership of the land. Something else about the area was there's a creek that runs through the area called the Perkiomen. The Indian word for that, meaning for that, is muddy waters. They also used to call it the Perquimink. That roughly translates to the place where we were frightened. And I thought, no, that's good.
Oh, I'll bet you did. All right, Dave, please tell us about the Schwenksville incident. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, we covered the family's history at the farm back over the last 200 years or so. For whatever history might have rolled over this place, it's still primarily a farm. The couple, or the man, called me, and I came out to the farm, and I sat in the couple's living room and listened to them tell me everything. And it was kind of hard to follow them sometimes, but they did get their story across. They said that it started a long time ago, and that he didn't really believe much of it. He said his father told him some stories from his time as a kid, and he wasn't sure he believed that either. They both put a lot of the activity down to coyotes in the area, and occasionally other creatures that might be passing through. But they said that it started with the noise. The noise would start with the obvious coyote vocalizations. And then after that, they started noticing that some of the livestock was missing. They didn't really think too much about the loss of the chickens. But when they were finding larger animals gone or in bad shape, then they really started to get bothered by it. So at one point, I guess back in the late 70s, early 80s, he called someone in, and he said he called him a hunter. I don't really know what else you'd call him, but he came out and they said that after he was done, the situation quieted down a bit. But then, since then, recently, there has been a lot more activity. Also, since then, they've opened up one of the outbuildings and turned it into a rental cottage. And they're having some problems with people staying there. They're getting bothered by some of the things that were happening on the farm, and they were losing tenants. And I guess when they lost one in the middle of the night and he left suddenly with nothing but a suitcase, that's when I got called. So I came in, and again, I listened to what he had to say, and it was basically what they were feeling and what they were hearing and what they were hearing from the tenants that were on the property. So at some point, the guy told me what he encountered. He said that he was walking the property at night a lot of times with his dogs. This one particular night, he decided to walk out by himself. He heard the coyotes going off, and he walked in their direction. And then, as he got close to them, they kind of dispersed like they always did and shrugged shoulders, whatever he might do, head back to the house. So, on the way back to the house, he sees shadows moving through the woods and thought, well, okay. And it looks like a guy and maybe a couple of dogs. And he yelled to them that it was private property, and they didn't seem to react to that. So he ran up to him. And when he got close enough, he stopped short. He really didn't know what he was seeing, and it took him a long time to believe his own eyes. But the word he used was dire wolves. I've heard that phrase elsewhere, and I never thought to use it for Dogman, but that's what he used. He said he was pretty terrified. He never saw anything like this. He said that these guys were very large. One of them was man-like, his words, and about 9 feet tall, 4 feet wide. And when he got within 25 yards of them, they all stopped and turned to look at him. He said there were 3 of them, and once he got close enough, they all stood up, and that completely freaked him out. He said the big one snarled at him, and he thought that there were too many teeth in his mouth. That's what he said to me. Thought that was kind of interesting. The only thing that he thought was good about the whole thing was that they didn't follow him. He started to back away. He had a gun with him, and he brought the gun up, but he didn't fire. And he started to back away, and they didn't follow him. And as he got back far enough, the 2 smaller ones dropped back down, all fours, but the large one stayed standing. And as he got back to the house, they just moved off in the same direction they were going before. I guess I could have mentioned that around this farm, on either side of it, one side, there's some game lands, and on the other side is a dairy farm. And they were going in the direction of the game lands. So he went back to the house, and he decided not to say anything to his wife until he was a bit calmer. And then he related the story to her, and they talked about it for a while, and they decided that they needed to get somebody out here and take a look at this. So that's where I came into the story. I listened to their story, and then I had to decide what I was going to do.
When you were sitting there talking with that couple, Dave, did you ever get the impression that his wife might not have bought into his story 100%?
She was looking at him pretty intently. Maybe part of that was because he hadn't related a lot of the story to her that he had just related to me. But after a while, she seemed to nod in agreement with him. Then she had a comment to me, and she said, well, if my husband saw something, then she's learned to take his word for it. So I guess she bought into it at some point.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I know that's going to be a huge help for him. So that we can better understand, what's the layout of that property like, Dave? Things like what kind of topography is there? Anything like that you can share is what we're looking for.
Well, it's pretty far away from any town in the area. It's about 350 acres, pretty big farm. It's bisected by a couple of roads. It's mostly flat, but there are some hilly sections which contain substantial woods. And there's a lot of trees on the borders of the property. There's a lot of outbuildings, barn and the rental cottage and some other buildings and the house. There's also a lot of trails through the property. there's land on the side where the house and the buildings are, and then there's a big chunk of land on the other side of kind of a main road, and more land over there than there is on the house side. And I'd say at one time, probably back in the 60s and the 70s, it was a real working farm. By the time I got there, there really wasn't much going on there at all. I'd say the only open areas were between the houses and the outbuildings, and the rest of it was overgrown or filled with rusting farm equipment and some dead vehicles.
When you look at the history of that property and how large it is and everything, it sure is a shame to see that it's become so run down like that. Maybe run down's not the word, but to see that it's not a full working farm anymore is kind of depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, and I thought the same thing, that here's 350 acres of prime land that at one time was probably extremely productive. And I guess just over time, and as people get older and they don't bring anybody else in to help them, it just declines along with everything else. There is the state game lands to the west of the property, and to the east of the property is a very large dairy farm, which is really well run. And you look at it, it's neat and it's organized. You run into farms where everything's haphazard, but then you find these farms like this one where everything is very well laid out and taken care of. And I got a really good feeling from that farm, and I thought that maybe at one time this farm was like that, but not now.
It sounds like a really neat area. What kind of moving water is in that area? Are there many creeks and streams?
There is. There's the main creek, the Perkiomen, which is, I'd say, about 2 or 3 miles from the property, maybe more. The creek meanders quite a bit, so there are times when the property gets closer to it than others, I guess. There's a couple tributaries to the Perkiomen. There's one creek that runs through the property. It's quite small, maybe just a couple inches deep at times. And I believe that's a tributary to the Perkiomen as well.
Yeah, Dogman would have everything they need then on that property. What more could they want?
Well, there's a dairy farm, if they like milk.
Yeah, I don't think that comes into the picture. At least hopefully not. Have you heard about any neighbors or other residents in that area seeing dogmen before or since the Schwenksville incident?
No, not at all. I haven't really talked to anybody. I don't really know anybody from that area. I do know someone maybe 5 or 7 miles away in another town, but never anything like that at all. I have not been contacted by anyone, so this is really an isolated incident.
Well, that's a good thing then. Please tell us about the researcher Tom you spoke with and his friend Brian, who did a little bit of researching on their own on the farm.
Well, I took the report from the couple, and I decided that I would talk to a couple friends of mine and see if they'd be interested in doing some more in-depth research. So my friends Tom and Brian, Brian's a former Navy SEAL, and Tom served on artillery in Afghanistan. I've known them for quite some time, and they like to do stuff like that, urban exploration and ghost hunts and things like that. So I brought them in, and they went out. We all went out, actually, and did a preliminary look of the property. When I was with them, I did notice something really strange, is that when we went out to the barn area, there was really deep scratches in the barn. I've really never seen anything like this. They were like 4 deep parallel scratches that went all the way around the barn. They did look like animal scratches, but in a weird way. I mean, most animals, when they scratch at stuff, it's interspersed over a pretty large area, and it's kind of random. But these looked like something just took a 4-pronged meat claw and just pulled it right through the wood of the barn. And that was pretty freaky. And it was 5 feet off the ground, which was even worse. And we all looked at each other. Nobody said anything. So we looked around the property, and I walked them the trails with them, and then I left. And they decided to take it on from there. And they said they were going to stay there for a couple of nights. And I said, okay, and I'm ready to take their report when they were done.
I never will understand why dogmen like to do that so much. Maybe it's just the fact that it intimidates you so much when something gouges the wall of a house or a cabin or a barn like that. You talk about creepy, that's just over the top.
Oh, I didn't even know what to say. None of us knew what to say. We looked at it like, something that could do that could very easily just knock right through any wall of a house or a barn or anything else like that. But apparently that's not what it did. It just put these big scratches. I can't imagine what else could have done it. I mean, even before we knew what we were dealing with, that was pretty isolated. That was pretty intimidating.
Oh, I'd say it would be. We didn't see the Dogman or whatever it was that made those gouges actually do it. But since there is a history of dogmen doing that on a lot of occasions, it makes it pretty likely that it was a dogman that did that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's it. The reports that came out, they really pointed that direction. And missing livestock and the man's encounter, which couldn't be anything else really in my mind. And then seeing that just kind of cemented the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. Those two, Tom and Brian, wound up having their own experience on that property. What happened to them?
I guess they kind of walked into it, didn't they? They decided that they were going to, they told the homeowner they were going to research what was going on the property. So the homeowner said, okay, well, he and his wife decided to go visit her sister in Ohio for a week and leave the farm to them. So they said, all right. And they set themselves up in the cottage and see what they could see. I'll tell you that I know they were armed. I know that each of them had at least 45 and a couple of shotguns, expecting the worst, I guess. See the gouges, maybe you would expect the worst. But they decided to stay in the cottage for a couple of days and nights. They asked me what I had heard from the homeowner, and I explained what he had encountered and what they had been hearing. And they wanted to get a feel for what routines they might go through. So they decided to sit down on the porch of the cottage every night until it got dark. And this they did. And so every night around 9 o'clock or so, the coyotes would start. So the first night, the coyotes went off and they left the porch and looked in the woods and approached the wood line. The coyotes stopped and ran off. And they said, okay. They did think they saw a couple of shadows in the woods, but they thought maybe that was the coyotes themselves, and everything seemed to calm down after that. Went back to the house. So the next night, they went out when they heard the coyotes, and they definitely saw shadows moving through the woods. They stopped, and they asked each other what they were feeling, and was not a good feeling, apparently. So they went out deeper into the woods this time, and the deeper they got, the worse the feeling got. At one point, Tom saw what he thought was a large dog eating something on the ground. And he didn't know what it was. And got a little closer, brought his gun up, and at that point he said the wind seemed to shift. And whatever it was, turned and looked at him. He turned and looked at Brian. Brian lost his bladder. So they went in, they saw this guy, and he stood up, turned to face him. And he told me that he heard the legs make noise when he stood up. So at this point, I think I want to say something about my encounter back in North Carolina, because that's exactly what I saw. And I don't know what that is. They seem to stand up on their two legs, and their legs seem to pop into place. And the closest thing I can relate to that is I used to know a guy that had a dislocated shoulder. He could pop it out, which I have no idea why he'd do that, but he'd pop it out and then he'd pop it back in again. And it sounded just like that, except maybe 20 times louder. So I'm not really sure why they're doing it or what they're doing or what advantage they have by standing up, but they seem to all do it. And I'd like to know why. I'd like to know what it is that makes them want to stand up like that, what advantage they have doing that, and what the mechanism is. I'll tell you, it freaked me out back in 2009, probably more than anything else in the encounter, even though there were scarier parts. Well, back to these guys. luckily for them, there was only one of them. They said he stood up, he shook into place, and showed his teeth, and snarled at them. They described the snarl as like a high-low growl, almost like a European fire engine, but in the guttural way. They thought also that there was way too many teeth in this guy's mouth. I mean, he growled at him, showed their teeth, and he's thinking, mouth like a shark, and way too many teeth. He told me he started thinking it was a bad idea to interrupt the guy's dinner. Well, he said he thought about emptying his clip. He really thought about emptying his clip into this guy, but he decided not to. And one of the reasons he said he decided not to is because it seemed to him that the dogman was looking at their guns. He was standing there very threatening, but he was looking straight at the guns as if he recognized them. I guess that's something. So he said after what seemed to be eternity of no one moving, he was just about to shift position, and the dogman took a step backward. And that's pretty amazing. He couldn't imagine that he was afraid of them, but he took a step backward. And then he took another step backward. And he dropped to all fours and started moving off. And they didn't move. They were just standing there looking at him. They were having kind of, a standoff. And at some point, the dogman decided to move off. So, I really don't know what to do at this point. I'm sure that it may have gone through their mind they're about to get ripped to shreds by some enormous creature, but that didn't happen. It moved off and started moving toward the dairy farm. He said that it hit the electric fence at the property line, and it didn't seem to faze him at all. It just kind of surprised him a little bit, and he moved off. And so he turned around just in time to see another one moving off from behind them and circling around to meet the first one. And this one hadn't made any noise at all. I'm really surprised by this. They also described this guy to be about 2 feet shorter and without so much of a pinched waist. So, might have been a female. I guess we'll never know. So, they left also, backed off, and went to the cottage and decided to see what would happen next. So, they were in the cottage, starting to relax a little bit, if that's the right word. Brian was upset. He told Tom he didn't know what that was. And, he's used to dealing with humans and couldn't figure out what that was. And Tom told him that he might have to expect something a little strange. That's why I brought him out there. So they started to relax a bit in the cottage, and right about that point, they heard the most horrific howl they'd ever heard in their lives. Scared the crap out of them. And it was close. Just they're trying to think about what that might be or where it might be. Started hearing stuff hitting the roof, like maybe rocks or clumps of dirt, and hearing scratches on the side of the house and thinking, oh, geez. Seeing the scratches on the barn, well, the cottage they were in had half the thickness of the barn walls. So they're just waiting for this thing to come right through the wall, but it did not. The scratching noises, the noises on the roof. After a while, that all stopped. So they waited, and after a while, the crickets started up again, he said, and then they did something that they had wanted to do, that they had planned to do going into this, and they had shared with me, is that they wanted to see what they would react to for a shotgun blast. So after everything kind of calmed down from the cottage at that point, they each went out and fired off their shotguns. And it seemed to work. The night passed very peacefully after that. The cricket noises came back. Everything seemed to calm down. They didn't have that watch feeling that they had before, and thought maybe they had some good luck here. So they waited 6 a.m. morning time, went back out and went into the woods and didn't really see any signs of anything. No clumps of dirt laying around like it hit the roof or anything. They did find the remains of a calf that guy was eating in the same spot where they had encountered him. And that made me think that they might be raiding the dairy farm. So they have state game lands on one side and the dairy farm on the other. And maybe they're just using this property as a thoroughfare between the two food sources. And we all kind of agreed to that. So the two guys spent another night at the farm, and there was no encounter, there was no reaction, there was no obvious happenings between Dogman and them for a full 24 hours. And night after that, the same kind of thing, the homeowner came home from Ohio and asked them if they saw anything. And they told them what happened, more or less. And I came back into it at this point, and we all sat down and talked about it. And we reiterated the thought that this farm of theirs might be a thoroughfare for large predators. We never used the word dogman, but large predators. He used the word direwolves. We just let him say it. So then we told him maybe he should research and see how big of a fence he could put up on the property. Every township has different ordinances. We suggested that he might want to put up a deer fence or a cow fence as high as the township will allow him on the property perimeter, and possibly electrify it. Because if these guys were crossing through his property to get between the food sources, maybe he could push them to a different trail. Maybe. So when I left the last time, he said he had planned on doing that.
I sure can't imagine what it would be like to live on a property like that when you know those things are around and could pop up at any moment.
Yeah, I would imagine that does make for some sleepless nights.
Oh, I'd say so. You just mentioned that high-low snarling sound that Tom and Brian reported hearing. That reminds me of all the eyewitnesses who have reported hearing that kind of sound from a dogman when it was snarling at them. They said it sounded a lot like an espresso machine.
Well, my own experience, I didn't hear that. In fact, I've never heard that. Back in '09, when I encountered them in the swamp, the one that snarled at me was a very just low growl, and it didn't seem to change pitch at all. It was almost like a dog growl. So I was interested when Tom had said what this sounded like. It was foreign to me, but now you say that it's not foreign at all. It's reported quite a bit, and that's interesting.
It does seem to be reported quite a bit, so it's definitely not unprecedented.
Yeah, that's odd. I thought it was odd, but maybe it's not odd. Maybe it's just, I don't even know what to say, breed related. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to say. How long have you known Tom?
Let's see. I've known Tom about maybe 6 years. 6 years, that's all right. I really didn't know the other guy very much. I'd met him a couple of times, but I didn't know him personally like I knew Tom. And, you know, Tom's a good guy. Lost his hearing in Afghanistan, shooting off too much 155 millimeter, I guess, but he's a good guy. He is definitely an adventurous type. And when I told him about this, he kind of jumped at the chance to see something different. I guess he wasn't really prepared for how different it was going to be, huh?
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't expect it to be that different. And after living through something like that, I've got to wonder if it didn't knock some of that adventurous spirit out of him.
Yeah, well, that could be. I haven't heard from him since. He has not contacted me. He didn't specifically say that he never wanted to see me again, as I've run into that before, but it seemed like we should be contacting each other and we're not. So maybe he's got to take some time with us.
Yeah, it sure sounds to me like that might be what's going on. What's the current state of affairs on that farm, Dave?
Well, I contacted the owner one more time after I had left to see what he was doing. And he said that he put the fence up. He had a professional fence company come in and put up an 8-foot fence backed by a deer fence. So it was kind of a wooden farm fence backed by deer fencing. And he was in the process of electrifying it. He has said that he's always armed. He's always got a pistol and a Bowie knife is what he said he carries with him at all times. But he told me that since he's put the fence up, he hasn't had anything close. And I asked him what that meant. And he said, well, that he had gone out into the property at night, which is something he wasn't doing for a long time, because the coyotes weren't coming in anymore. I guess they're not getting past the fence. And he said that he may have seen shadows moving off, but at a much more distant point, maybe 300-400 yards, far enough that he couldn't tell what they were. Could have been anything. But the important point is that he's not getting traffic like he was getting.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that fence seems to be helping. As far as long-term would go, I've got serious doubts that it's going to keep them out of there. With the way they can jump, with as intelligent as they are, if they want to get in, I've got no doubts that they're going to be right back in.
You know, I thought about that when I was telling him about the fence. I thought, you know, you can put a fence up, but these guys might just jump right over it. If there's something on his property that they want, there's not a lot that's going to keep them out. I'm hoping that they just wanted a dairy farm and the game lands, and maybe there wasn't anything of interest on his farm. But on the other hand, I don't know how long these things have been around, and just like humans are creatures of habit, if they've been traversing his property to get from one place to another, I'm not sure whether just putting up a fence is going to break that behavior. But so far, he hasn't seen anything, but that's not to say they weren't there.
I wish I could say differently, but I've got serious doubts that the fence will break that behavior. But you never know.
You never know. That's what I said to him.
That's right. Do you have any trips planned back to the farm?
I thought about going back on my own and just making a spontaneous visit and see what was going on, thinking to myself that maybe that kind of a visit might have an unrehearsed reaction, but I decided against it. The way I left it with him is that if he felt the need to give me a call, he hasn't done that, so I'm not going to do anything unless he does.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. At any time while you're listening to that property owner or Tom talk about their experiences on that farm, did you start to second guess your decision to research Dogman?
You know, I'd really like to say that I didn't, but I'll tell you, there was a good amount of time between my encounter and this one, and maybe that amount of time, I wouldn't say made me forget, but it gave me a buffer of safety, possibly. Because now, when we start to dig up these old memories and start to see the similarities between my close encounter and theirs, it makes me wonder whether I want to get that close again.
Oh, I can definitely understand that. I think you'd only be fooling yourself if you didn't admit that.
Yeah, I think that I made the right decision to have someone else do deep investigation. I had said that I wanted to investigate the Dogman, and I wanted to get involved with various groups to do that. And I think it's a good idea to go in and take a report and file it. I'm not quite sure whether it's a good idea to investigate each one in depth. You might get into a situation that you can't control or handle. You never know, again.
You never do know. I agree. That's why it's so hard to understand how people can go out, especially alone, into the night into places where they know that dogmen frequent, without any backup plan or anything like that. To each their own, and if you want to do that, I've got nothing but respect for you, but I just can't understand that. Back when you were having your encounter that night on that lonely road, would you ever have imagined you'd be actively researching dogmen like this?
No. At the time that happened, I had definitely thought that, again, I was interested. After the fear wore off, I was interested, but I didn't see myself actively searching them out. I never wanted to have another encounter, and if I was going to be researching, well, something like that might happen. But no, the answer would be I would never imagine myself actively searching them out. What you said before about people going out alone without any backup plan, oh, that's just crazy. If I was going to go out and do some serious on-hands research, I would never go alone. I'd always bring somebody with me. I would make sure that people that knew me knew where I was going and when I'd be expected back. I would bring a couple of days worth of equipment or supplies, because you never know what's going to happen. You might be out there, you want to be out there for a couple hours and it turns into an overnight ordeal. So you definitely want to bring some things with you in case that were to happen. And possibly weapon of some kind. I mean, I usually would do that when I travel around, but not always. So, yeah, investigating is pretty cool, and it turned out to be really great. But I think that you need to consider a lot of safety procedures going into that.
It's only prudent to do that. You know, Dave, I read you wrong. When you told me you wanted to start researching dogmen, I had the impression that you wanted to go out and beat the bush and look for them, but from what you're saying, I get the impression that you don't want to do that as much as speak with eyewitnesses and document the information that they have to share about their encounters. Is that accurate?
In a way, I think that I want to try and balance the two and not 50-50 either. I think that I really want to talk to people about their experiences and try and help them get through them on one hand. And on another hand, yeah, I would like to get out there personally and check it out, but I think I'd like to do it in a less random way. This particular incident was fortunate that there were two guys ready to go out there and check this out, not knowing at all what they were going to come up against. I mean, there was a little bit of background there, but their encounter turned out to be maybe worse than the other guy. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't there. But I think that part of me wants to go out and, like you said, beat the bushes and actively seek them out with other people, with safety in mind, with a backup plan, possibly an escape route. And I would like to do that. I think that it's kind of like maybe a 70-30 thing rather than a set way of doing things.
Well, you've got a great head on your shoulders if you do decide to go out and beat the bushes looking for these things. I can't imagine a better person to be out there doing that, so I think you will have good luck if you do decide to do that in any capacity.
Well, like I said, I do plan on doing it. I think it's going to be more or less as things come up, spur of the moment, possibly. I have a guy that called me a couple of weeks ago in middle northeastern Pennsylvania, I'd say. If I were to put a town to it, I'd say the eastern area. And he had an encounter of sorts that he related to me, and he wanted me to come up and listen to what he had to say. And I know the area pretty well. My mom grew up in that area. And that is an instance where I think I might want to check it out. There's a lot of strange history up there as well. But from what he said and what he described, I think I'd be interested in going out on that one.
Well, if you do decide to head that way and research it, I hope it turns out well for you.
Well, if I do, and it does, you'll be sure to hear about it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, please do keep me in the loop. Well, Dave, it's about time to wrap this thing up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I got to say that this encounter was completely different from my last one. In a way, I guess I thought it out. I'm not sure that everybody should do that. I know that the last time I came on and we were talking about this, I had said that I thought that people shouldn't stop what they were doing because of these encounters, that the state parks and the national parks and recreational activities were there for us to enjoy, and we should still go out and do them. With that in mind, like anything else or any other negative experience that may happen, people just need to be more aware of their surroundings and take a look and see what might be in the area they're in more than they would. I know that I do that now. And with this, I actively went out to see what was going on rather than having a chance encounter. So there's a difference there, meaning you want to go out and have a good time with the recreational activity and be more aware of your surroundings. And then on the other side, if you're going to go out and investigate, I guess the same thing holds true 100 times more if that's what you decide to do. So I certainly wouldn't dissuade anybody from doing anything. But I think with everything that's going on in the world, we just have to be more aware of our surroundings.
That's not a bad idea. Dave, thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for coming on the show tonight and sharing this info with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic.
Have yourself a great night.